Hi everybody, thanks for joining me again. This is just a very quick update as a follow-up to the last part of this build on the Special Hobby 132 scale Tempest. I nearly got the airframe done in part 3, but I want to finish it off in this short episode. We've got one or two other little bits and pieces to do as well, particularly filling of the nose section, which you know that I had a little bit of trouble getting that to fit, and we've got a gap on the wing root. There's also some gaps underneath as well that we need to sort out, and we've got the tail surfaces to fit the rudder and horizontal stabilizers. You notice that I've also covered the underside, the chin section, because this is a painted section in the medium sea grey, and I don't want to scuff or scratch that when it's hanging around on the bench. So just a bit of tape protects it. The other thing that I've done here is to tape the bubble canopy in position, and that's because you can see here we've got the armour plate for the pilot, and that is attached to the seat bulkhead, and I have actually knocked that down once or twice and had to glue it in again. So it's gone down into the fuselage and I've had to lift it back up and refix it. So this just protects from that happening again, because now that the fuselage is attached to the wings, I couldn't fix that at this stage if it happened again, so that's just protecting it. So I'm going to start by assembling the tail surfaces, and I think on this one I'm going to be drooping the elevators a little bit just to add a little animation to the model. Just gluing the two halves of all these parts together. It's a nice little trick to use some blue tack there just to hold the part while you're gluing it. If you try to hold it with your fingers, sometimes you can get glue smears on the model surface, so this just helps prevent that. I use Revel contactor for all these large joins rather than the Tamiya extra thin. This gives a better bond, and it also does a little bit of filling as well. So we'll get all these together. While I've got the sprue out, I just want to clear this last sprue by cutting the drop tanks out and gluing those together. Just put those to one side, they're nowhere near being required at the moment. So I'll get on and get some filling done now. And I think for these joins here, I'll use some Milliput, some 2-part epoxy putty, and I'll use some Mr. Surfacer here on the rear side of the wing to fuselage join. I'm also going to repair these rivets, this line of rivets here. I've just overdone it a little bit with the rivet tool and they're a bit deep, so I'll fill those in and redo them. So just a few bits and pieces to do. I like to use Milliput Superfine White, it dries nice and smooth. So we'll get some of that mixed up. If you read the instructions on Milliput, you'll know that you've got to, or it advises that you mix this together, the two parts, for something like 6 to 7 minutes, which sounds an awfully long time. But I do try to do that, and it just avoids the two-part putty from taking a long time to dry. It dries in probably around 2 hours, rock solid. But I'll mix this together and apply it and leave it until tomorrow to actually clean up. The reason why I'm using Milliput on these joins is because I'm going to be able to clean them with water, remove the excess with water, which is a cleaner job. But it's important that you only use milliput when you've got a really solid join. And if you watch the last episode, you know that I added some braces. You can just see them in the bottom of the nose there from some styrene. So this is a really solid join. It's not really advisable to use milliput where the join has any chance of flexing, and that's because it will just crack out. So milliput doesn't actually attack the plastic, if you like other fillers do. So it doesn't actually chemically bond to the plastic surfaces, whereas model putty, something like the Mr. Hobby filler that I generally use, so it'll actually bond to the plastic and act as almost as a sort of cement, whereas this stuff doesn't. But it's easy to clean up. You can see the join there is nice and clean. And if you use a cotton bud to do the cleanup on the panel line, you can actually rub it down enough so that the panel line remains. So just one other thing I always do with milliput is to keep the spare from the mixture that you've used just as a guide to know when the putty is set hard. So I'll just leave that to one side, and when that goes hard, I know that the filler on the model is hard as well. This is Mr. Surfacer 500. I'm just using it to just fill in a little gap at the trailing edge, just where the parts haven't come together quite right. So just tidies them up a little bit. One of the reasons I think for this sort of fit problem, where the two halves don't quite come together, is because on this kit the alignment pins and the sockets don't really come together properly. The pins are a little bit big for the sockets, so it just holds the part open a little bit. The fact that the kit's got pins and sockets for alignment is a bit of an advance, because early special hobby kits didn't have anything at all. But I think what I would do again if I was building this would be to just remove the pins and rely on my eye to get the parts aligned properly, so I didn't rely on the pins and sockets. So it's just an area where the kit needs to be a little bit more refined. So the horizontal stabilizers, they're a little bit tight in the slots, but not overly. So they'll go in all right. And I will fit the elevators in a slightly drooped position, just a little bit, like that. But I'm not going to fit these tail surfaces yet, because there's a lamp which fits on both sides of the tail at this point, and I want to be able to fit that and fare it into the shape of this fillet here, and that would be difficult to do with the horizontal stabilizer in place. So I'm going to remove those for the moment and sort those transparencies out. So these are the transparencies for the lamps. We've got the two here for the tail, which I'm going to do next, but we've also got the wingtip navigation lights as well. So I'm going to fit all four of these before painting. I like to blend them into the airframe and then mask them off, ready for when I paint the rest of the aircraft. So I'm going to do them one at a time so that I don't get them mixed up. I've taken a look at these already and they're not going to fit exactly, so they're going to need a little bit of work to get them smoothed in. There's also a really awkward scrap of the sprue gate on the inner mating face of this lamp, and if that's not removed, you're just not going to get it to fit onto the tailpiece here. So I'm going to try and sand that down. It's just so awkward to hold. I'm just going to drill a hole in the back of the lamp to represent the bulb. And I'll just fill that with some silver paint. And then some interior green. So that's painted on both the tail surface and the back of the lamp. See if I can do this one on the sprue, it'd be easier. And then this is medium CA. So plenty of CA on. I want it to act as a filler as well as gluing the part in position. And then we just smooth it into the correct profile. You can see why it would be really difficult to do this with the tail surfaces fixed. The good thing about these parts is that they're really thick. They're too thick, in fact, for the shape of the tail. But they've also got some sink marks in, and what that means is that you can get rid of the sink mark as you're reprofiling the part. These lamp covers are going to be clear, so we're going to have to make sure that they're nice and polished. The covers on the wingtips are painted in red and green, so they don't have to be quite as well finished as these do. That's shaped it into the right profile. It's also got rid of the sink mark, I can see that. So I'll just polish these in with varying grades of micro mesh, and once that's done, there's just a little bit of re-scribing, re-riveting to do after all this sanding, and then we can get the tail surfaces fitted. Let's finish these lamps off with a little bit of Tamiya compound. This is the coarse grade. We've got the same process for the wingtip lights, but in this case I've got a feeling that they're going to be slightly more difficult to fit. Actually, they might not be too bad. I just put a squirt of accelerator on that just to set the CA. These are a much better fit than the tail covers, so hopefully they'll need a little less work to get them sorted. Just keep an eye on the panel lines when you're doing these, because it's easy to lose them. Just a final check of the area around these lamps. Okay, so I'm not going to do any more with that there. Alright, and they're nicely polished in, following the contour of the leading edge of the wing. And what I'll do later on is to just mask these off before I do the priming and obviously the paint scheme. Once all that's done, I can then just take the masking off and I'll just touch the lenses in with some clear green and some clear red. So I've done the same on these lamps at the back on the tail, and with that I'm now in a position to fit the tail surfaces. So I'll glue the stabilizers in first. These are going to need a little bit of filler on them. These Horizontal stabilisers aren't a brilliant fit. There's a bit of a gap there, but the usual treatment with some Mr. Surfacer will do the trick with it. Just wipe the excess off with some Tamiya lacquer thinners. Okay, so they've blended in nicely with that Mr. Surfacer. It really is wonderful stuff for doing this sort of final prep. Just got a bit of excess glue just squeezed out of the join there, so I like to use a fiberglass pencil just to rub that away. Okay, so they're all nicely blended in. Put the elevators on, and as I said, I'm going to just droop them slightly. Just make sure that they're at the same angle. Obviously the elevators move together. Okay, so I've moved on a little bit and I've primed the airframe. I've checked round and everything looks good, so I'm not going to have to do any more remedial work, thank goodness. I've also fitted the rear deck here, which needed a little bit of work of sanding, trimming and using Mr. Surfacer just to blend it all in here. But that's gone in now, and I've also started to prepare the canopy and windscreen. The sliding canopy is not a problem, it just got a little bit scratched in the packaging, so that's just been polished and that will just fit onto the rails like that, something like that. So that's not a problem. The windscreen is a different matter, that needs quite a bit more work to get it to fit properly, and that's because the front edge here is too thick to fit into the recess in the forward part of the fuselage here, just in front of the instrument panel. So that needs thinning out quite a bit till it's only probably a third of a millimetre deep, something like that, and that enables it to fit in to that recess nice and snug, so it ends up being flush at the front. So with a little bit of work the part does fit, but not straight out of the box. So I don't have time to fit that for this episode because I need to do some work on the gun sight, because that attaches right inside and I'm not going to be able to get it in afterwards. So I'll come to that later. And there's also, I've got a bit of a question about which gun sight to use. Special Hobby provide both a reflector sight and a gyro sight in resin, so you can see the framework common for both sights. This is the resin reflector and this is the gyro, and we also get a couple of transparencies to use as the gyro reflector glasses. Now I think that the airframe that I'm going to be representing will have had a gyro sight, but I just need to do a little bit more research on that. So the aircraft that I'm looking to represent, or near to it, is option A in the Special Hobby kit, which is for this aircraft of Pierre Clostermann, coded JFE, with the marking Le Grand Charles and a scoreboard and a red spinner. The problem is that I don't think from my research that this aircraft was SN222. Clostermann did fly SN222 and actually scored victories in it, I think, but it didn't have, according to my research, this combination of scoreboard and red spinner. That applied to NV944, and Montex provide NV944 as the serial number here, so that's what I'm going to be using. I'll give a link to that research that I've found in the video description below if you want to check it out for yourself. But I'm fairly convinced that the aircraft that Special Hobby are attempting to represent in option A should be coded 944. So that's what I'll be doing in the next episode, but the scheme will look more or less like this except for the serial number. So that'll be next time. I'll start off by sorting the windscreen and sight out, and then we'll start to do the painting, and hopefully at the end of the episode we'll have the aircraft painted with all the markings on it. So that'll be coming up in part 5, probably in just over a week. I've got some work to do on the Bismarck for the next few days. Telford's looming, and I better get sorted out with the Bismarck build. But if you subscribe to the channel and you make sure your notifications are switched on, you'll get to know when that next part 5 is available. So thanks for joining me for this one, and thanks for all the comments from those of you that are building the kit. I think you're finding it useful, at least I hope you are. And I'll see you next time. So look after yourselves, everybody. Bye for now.